he just makes the draw by repetition. I think for both players, it's kind of uncomfortable to stall this early in the match. You just don't feel like you're in the rhythm of the games. And Jan Nepomniachtchi, 2-1 advantage right now. He gets the white pieces. He goes back to e4, and we're getting I think we're going to get another fight in this game too.
All right, and so we have the Sicilian 4 knights. Here, Jan has a couple of decisions. He can go knight db5. That could turn the game back into a Sveshnikov, but he went for knight takes c6, the other main line. Magnus recaptured with the pawn, and then e5, knight e4. And we see the move c5 by Magnus, ignoring the threat on the knight, but attacking the knight on e4.
This is such a fun opening position, because my first instinct would be to play knight d6 check. And if the bishop takes d6, I'd want to take with the queen, but I can't because knight c2 fork at the end. I don't want to take on d6 with a pawn, and he's going for this exact line. That pawn, Benjamin, do you see it as a strength or a weakness? Because it is very deep in enemy camp.
Yeah, it's a great question, Robert. The good thing also about this pawn on d6 is that this pawn on c5 is practically isolated. After bishop e3, there's no such move as d6 here, so it's going to be awkward to defend. So what exactly is Magnus going to do here? You can defend it temporarily with queen a5, but white just goes queen e2, offers the trade of queens. And again, this pawn is terribly weak, so not easy to deal with this for Magnus. And hey, we've talked about this yesterday. Do you think there is a chance that Giannis looked at this for the World Chess Championship? Because again, for that match, I'm sure he's checked every single opening under the sun.
Jan's preparation has proven excellent, and he probably has looked at something like this for the World Championship. Queen f6, played by Magnus, so he defends tactically. He's not actually protecting the c5 pawn, but he says it's going to be an equal trade, 1 for 1. Give me your b2 pawn, your king feels less safe. And if you play a move like rook to b1, some kind of slow move, I think that black has knight to d4. Even now, after queen d2, knight sits on d4, please take me. I'll have e5 to follow it up, and that d6 pawn that we were talking about, it's no longer an argument. That one will be vulnerable.
But look at how Jan deals with it. He trades on d4 and goes queenside castles in. How do you defend the pawn on d4? If you go e5, white is going to blast up the structure with the move f4, and your center is falling apart. Jan's doing great here.
Oh, f4 is such a good find. And that way, if you take the d4 pawn, the d6 pawn remains alive, and that would be an issue. So suddenly Magnus in some danger here. Jan's preparation has been good. Should black, you think, just castle kingside, give up the d4 pawn, and eventually go after the white king?
I mean, you can try, but the king is sitting pretty safe over here. The pawn on c4 is providing a nice shield. The king can always move over with like king b1, king a1 potentially. I don't know, it's looking tough for Magnus. The annoying thing for him is that after e5, f4, queen takes d6, pawn takes c5, queen takes c5, there is the move rook e1, so he's going to go down a pawn here.
Although there's bishop e4 at the end of that variation with maybe an f5, but look at this. Magnus gives up the pawn in the center, and Jan looks confused. He's like, are you sure about that? Queen takes d4, a queen swap, and Magnus Carlsen saying, yes, you're up a pawn, but the a3, b2 pawn combination there, the one pawn stops two, and maybe there will be a way for him to go rook a5, castle, bring the other rook into the game, and just completely freeze white's pawns.
Yeah, if Magnus could get all of those moves in, he's perhaps doing all right. So let's see what Jan is going to do in the meantime. Perhaps he can just go rook to g1, or he might not even have to protect this pawn, because in case Magnus takes, there is the move rook g1, attacking the bishop, and you regain the pawn on g7. So I guess now is a good time for Magnus to castle here, or play a move like f5, gaining some space in the center, followed by king f7, king f6, and then you can go for that set with bishop c6, rook a5, rook b8, and you have some sort of blockade on the queen side, so it might not be that bad.
Magnus Carlsen may not believe in fortresses, but it looks like he has one in this game. So he plays f6, which apparently is not recommended by the engines. I think the engines, they're a bit harsh in the sense that objectively it was not the best move. There was something better there. Maybe Magnus had to castle quickly to protect the g7 pawn that threatens g2. Then you bring the rook to the c file. But f6 looks like a very natural move from the #1 rated player in the world.
Exactly. He wants to go king to f7, bring his king up to the board, so then he can go rook to b8, then bishop c6, I guess, rook a5. It's all looking pretty solid. c5 by Jan, a nice move. He wants to go perhaps bishop b5 and go after this pawn at a4. I like what he's doing. He's not allowing Magnus to consolidate here.
Well, now that actually explains why f6 was a mistake, because it allowed white to play c5, and look at the eval bar, it's going up more and more in white's favor. That's going to be a pass pawn on d6. Now that d7 is removed, But Benjamin, I look at this, I still feel like Magnus has very good chances to hold, but how could you not like White's position? The a4 pawn is loose as well.
Yeah, now this looks great for Jan. He is now in check, so I guess he has to go king b1 or king d2. The pawn at a4 is about to drop. He's got this pass pawn at d6. But yeah, if he takes the pawn at a4, he will have two connected passers on the queen side. This is looking very problematic for Magnus, Robert. And if Magnus loses this game, he will go down 2 points in the match.
And that could be a dream come true for Jan Nepomniachtchi and a nightmare for Magnus. You don't want Jan to feel the rhythm. As soon as he starts feeling good about his chess, we know how dangerous a confident Jan Nepomniachtchi is. He's run away with the candidates tournament. He won before even the final round was played. So do not give Jan this confidence. Right now, how could he not be confident with that d6 pawn 2 squares away from promotion?
Exactly, yeah. So let's see what Magnus is going to do. You can take on g2, but I suppose you just go rook e1, attacking the pawn on e6. And once you go e5, then you take on a4. And it's so annoying for Magnus that for the moment this d6 pawn remains on the board. This is looking super tough. And again, Robert, look at the clock. Jan again up a minute.
Jan Nepomniachtchi, he continues to do well on the clock. And Magnus Carlsen, he looks kind of upset right now. He does attack this rook on d4. That's the good news. But when the rook just slid over to b4, this a4 pawn at the end of it is going to be loose. But Jan apparently made a mistake. Rook to g1, yeah. The very natural move. Was that wrong somehow?
I think he played way too quickly here after e5. Why did he first of all not take an a4? And after bishop takes g2, I think he should also have considered the move rook to d1. Now, Magnus might be out of the woods. There's a check, but king e6. Black should be doing absolutely fine here because the rooks finally get active.
It looks so scary to allow 2 rooks on the 7th rank, but the king's already escaped the back rank, so there's not going to be a checkmate. And suddenly, we've seen this so many times, can Magnus Carlsen play for more? He's going to have the active king. He's going to bring a rook of his own down to the 2nd rank. And if he can get both of his rooks in the 1st rank, we could even see a back rank checkmate threat thanks to that pawn on a4. I think this is actually a position all 3 results are possible.
Exactly, yeah, no, the pawn on a4 would freeze the white king on a2. So that would be pretty tough for Jan. Also, these pawns on f2 and h2 are weak. Your majority on the queen side for the moment is quite useless. So I think Magnus is doing absolutely fine. Like you said, he has the potential to even play here for a win. He goes pawn at d7, Jan. All right, so let's see what Magnus is going to do here. Maybe g5, preserving the g-pawn, or just going rook to d6.
But rook d6 is met by rook takes g7, so that would keep that pawn on the board. So he does play your first move, g5. That's a great choice, and this is why I believe that this position has chances for both sides to win. d7 remains, but look at Black's extra pawns on the king side. It's 4 on 2 on that side of the board. And the EVA bar suddenly is favoring Black because rook c4, and that rook can start going after those white pawns.
Yeah, we see a rook a6 check by Jan, but yeah, Magnus has a lot of potential here on the king side. He can go, let's say, rook f4 or rook h4, going after the pawn on h2. And Jan, for the moment, does not have a single active idea. The great thing here for Magnus is that he can, let's say, go rook h4, and he doesn't need to rush with going rook takes h2. He can go h5 first, as Jan has to keep an eye on this pawn. He also has to keep defending the pawn on d7. So, I don't know, has Magnus turned this one completely around?
He has indeed. That's a good move, though, rook to d3. Instead of defending passively, because rook f4, he'll play rook h3 and target that loose h7 pawn. I really like rook to d3, and I think for Black, Benjamin, the move you've been shouting for, h5. That looks very strong because White's main idea is rook h3, and if you go rook f3, Black can always play rook f4 and trade the rooks on that square to protect the vulnerable f6 pawn.
Yeah, h5 looks like a nice move. Like I said, for the moment, rook h3 is a big threat for Jan, and there we have it. Magnus is so precise in the endgame. And I don't know, Robert, holding this game would already be a big success right now for Jan, whereas before, it looked like he was on his way to another victory.
It's a turnaround, just like in game 1, where Magnus, he had the upper hand with the white pieces, and suddenly Jan was able to steal a bishop in the game. Now, Jan has to figure it out, where he was first better, and now he has to make that switch in his mind. So we have rook f3 on the board. Rook f4 looks very strong to me. If rook takes g takes f4, and look at Black's pawns. They're marching up very, very quickly there. They're going to be dangerous.
Exactly, but what about this idea, Robert? What about rook takes d7, and if you take an f6, you can give a check, king a2, and rook c1, and Magnus is going down. Wait, check on rook d1?
Oh, Bakshi, was a mating net, potentially. So maybe there's a way out there for white, but this looks great for black. The evo bar's all the way down because white's king is cut off. Benjamin, it doesn't matter about the pawn quantity. I say this often in the endgame. Go take the h5 pawn. I don't care. But what's king e6, pawn e4? How are you stopping these passers?
I don't see it. Just go rook f2 here. Jan can go after the pawn on a4, but it will be super slow. Look at this, Robert. Jan is up a pawn, but his majority on the queen side is completely frozen. His rook on h3 is frozen. His king on b1 is completely stuck. This is a dominant position for Magnus Carlsen.
And what is he aiming for? It's black's turn, king to e3, just winning the f3, but it's rook h5, potentially. So you need to be a little bit precise here. He plays e4 because it's, again, not about the quantity, it's about the quality. The f pawn is hard to stop.
Exactly, yeah. It's very difficult to make a move here for Jan. If you go rook to h8, then Magnus can now go rook g2, followed by f2. And you can't quite stop that pawn. You can't also create any counterplay over here. Again, you're completely frozen on the queen side. So Magnus looks to be on his way to another victory here.
Magnus Carlsen, the best endgame player of all time, adding another one to his storybook career. He just knows when to liquidate. He knows what pawn formations are best for him. And right now, he knows that he's going to even up this match 2-2. Benjamin, I don't think we could have asked for more from these first 4 games.
No, for sure. And it will be interesting to see how Jan will deal with this. We know that sometimes he can go on tilt, and this can be quite a tilting loss. He had a good position, perhaps a winning position out of the opening,